A few weeks back, on a regular Monday morning, I was neck-deep in the usual chaos of getting our 2 kids ready for school. It was around 7:30 when the commotion was abruptly interrupted by the sharp ring of the phone. I glanced over, feeling a twinge of curiosity. Who'd be calling so early? The caller ID displayed a number with a strange area code, and my interest was piqued even further. "Hello?" I answered cautiously, pressing the phone to my ear. To my surprise, it was Emily, my wife, on the other end of the line. It was odd, we'd just chatted the night before. Emily works for a small marketing firm and usually keeps a packed schedule. I, on the other hand, handle things at home, looking after the kids while juggling my work-from-home job. She also does freelance consulting for a local printing company downtown. Despite our differing routines, we've made it work pretty well, earning enough to enjoy a comfortable life. We live in a cozy 4-bedroom house in the suburbs, complete with a swimming pool and a great group of friends nearby. So when Emily called sounding a little shaken, I immediately paid attention. "Last night," she began, "I went to the hotel lobby to grab a newspaper, and my purse was stolen. Can you cancel our credit cards right away and request replacements? I've already told Joy, my boss, and she's arranging for new American Express cards to be sent overnight so I can get them before leaving tomorrow. She's also transferring some funds to cover me in the meantime." Hearing the stress in her voice, I asked, "You're usually so careful with your stuff. What exactly happened?" She sighed, clearly upset. "I was distracted. I left my purse at the cashier's counter when I went to grab a couple more magazines. By the time I got back, it was gone. The cashier said she was busy with another customer and didn't notice anything. Unfortunately, my driver's license was in there too. The hotel staff is checking the dumpsters nearby, hoping to find it. If they don't, I might need to rely on a taxi for today's meeting. Don't worry about it," I reassured her. "I'll cancel the cards right away." "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice softening. "Aside from the $1,200 in cash that was in the wallet, I don't think we'll have too many extra costs. Most of my makeup is still in the room, so I'll be ready for the presentation. How are the kids? I miss having everyone together." That morning set off a whirlwind of calls and arrangements. Thankfully, I managed to cancel all the cards before any unauthorized charges popped up. Unfortunately, her wallet, with the driver's license and other items, was still missing. There wasn't much else I could do about that, so I focused on the next task at hand and tried to move forward. Life carried on as usual, but I've got something important to share. That lingering concern about Emily's stolen purse had slipped to the back of my mind until today, when something unexpected came up. While sorting through some paperwork to locate our home insurance policy, I stumbled across a folder containing monthly statements from Emily's Fidelity account. This account was tied to the inheritance she received after her parents' tragic accident a few years back, a sum I knew was around $350,000 at the time. I've always respected her privacy when it came to that fund, but curiosity got the better of me this time. Flipping through the statements, I was pleasantly surprised to see the account had grown to over $400,000. As I scanned the details, one transaction stood out: a $3,000 withdrawal from her money market account about 6 weeks ago. My curiosity kicked into overdrive. What could she have needed that amount for? That question led me to dig deeper into the account's transaction history. To my surprise, the funds were used to write a check to a local jewelry store, just a couple of days after her purse had been stolen in that same city. It didn't make sense. Emily hadn't mentioned buying anything from a jewelry store, and there hadn't been any talk of gifts or special purchases. She has a brother, but I couldn't imagine why he'd need a $3,000 present. I sat there mulling it over for a while before deciding to investigate further. I turned on my computer, looked up the store's website, and noted their phone number. Then, with a mixture of hesitation and determination, I picked up the phone and dialed. A woman answered, introducing herself as a store representative. "How can I help you today?" she asked in a polite tone. Clearing my throat, I provided my name and explained that I was inquiring about a specific transaction. I framed it as if there had been an issue with the purchase and asked if there was a warranty associated with it. She quickly looked up the transaction on her computer and asked, "What seems to be the problem with the rings?" For a moment I froze. Rings? What rings? My mind raced as I tried to piece things together. Before I could respond, the woman continued, her voice steady and matter-of-fact. "Oh, I remember this purchase," she said. "When your wife came in, she seemed quite upset. She mentioned her wedding and engagement rings had been stolen and that she wanted to replace them. It wasn't an easy process for her." Her words hit me like a bolt of lightning. Emily's rings? Stolen? This was the first I'd heard of it. While we explored options to meet her needs, she used the company's credit card as collateral and later followed up with a check to cover the cost. Hearing this, the woman on the phone assured me, "We offer a 90-day warranty for any issues with the rings. Are you concerned about the diamond setting becoming loose?" Her comment left me even more perplexed. Emily had mentioned her stolen purse, but never once did she say anything about losing her wedding and engagement rings. It took a moment for me to process this new piece of information. "Listen," I finally replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll need to discuss this with my wife before making any decisions. I'll get back to you later." With that, I thanked her and ended the call. While she seemed slightly confused, my own thoughts were racing in 100 different directions. If the rings had been in her purse when it was stolen, why would she have been carrying them in the first place? To the best of my knowledge, there was no professional reason for her to hide her marital status. But as unsettling as it was, the idea crept into my mind that she might have wanted to appear single in certain social situations. The possibility of such a motive made my stomach turn. Emily and I had been married for 11 years. We had 2 incredible kids, Jack, who's 7, and Linda, who just turned 6. I'd always thought we had a strong marriage, a perfect family life. From where I stood, our relationship seemed solid, and our personal life fulfilling. But now, doubts started gnawing at me. She traveled about once a month for work, usually spending 2 or 3 nights in different cities. If she had ever considered doing something as devastating as cheating, those trips could have been her chance to keep it under wraps. The idea was nauseating. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that losing the rings must have deeply unsettled her. Replacing them with nearly identical ones seemed like her way of avoiding questions, or suspicions, from me. I remembered how I'd saved up for those rings back in the day. They weren't extravagant by any means, so creating replicas probably hadn't been too expensive. Still, it stung to think she hadn't told me outright. If her purse was genuinely stolen, why hadn't she filed a formal report at the hotel? And if she did, what exactly did she claim was missing? Determined to find answers, I tracked down the hotel's contact number and made the call. When I inquired about the theft, they confirmed they had a written report on file. I requested a copy to be faxed to me, and within minutes, it arrived. The report was written and signed by Emily herself. In it, she claimed that her purse had been stolen while she was dancing in the hotel hall. She mentioned leaving the purse at her booth, and when she returned, it was gone. What caught my attention most, though, was her explicit note about hesitating to involve the police. As I read her words, my thoughts spiraled. The implications of this report were hard to ignore. Emily hadn't just hidden the truth about her missing rings, she had fabricated an entirely different story about how her purse was stolen. While I tried to consider other possibilities, my mind kept circling back to one troubling conclusion. It became painfully clear that the rings had been in her purse that night, and that she had been dancing with an unknown man. The weight of that realization hit me like a brick. If I didn't figure out the deeper meaning behind those lost rings, the questions swirling in my head would drive me insane. Several weeks had passed since the incident, and Emily was getting ready for another business trip in just a few days. I felt an urgent need to learn more about her schedule, where she'd be going, who she might meet, and most importantly, how she spent her evenings while away from home. If she had been involved with someone else, maybe losing the rings had been a wake-up call for her, a moment that made her reflect on her actions. But if I found proof of infidelity, I knew it would likely mean the end of our marriage. The thought of such a discovery terrified me, not just because of what it would mean for us, but because of how it could affect our kids. Emily was undeniably a great mother. Jack and Linda adored her, and she was always attentive and loving with them. Still, the idea of her having custody, especially given her frequent business trips, gnawed at me. How could she juggle her career, her travels, and raising 2 young kids? My mind raced, searching desperately for any hints about her faithfulness. Did she act differently on these trips? Could there be signs I'd missed? Questions piled up in my head, each more unsettling than the last. If she had been unfaithful, had she taken precautions? Surely, she'd insist on protection. She wouldn't want to risk bringing home an infection or an unplanned pregnancy. The uncertainty was maddening. I knew I needed answers, anything to confirm or deny the suspicions now dominating my thoughts. After the birth of our second child, I had a vasectomy, which ruled out the possibility of pregnancy. That left me with a troubling thought. If Emily was meeting other men, she couldn't rely on them to carry protection. She would need her own supply. The question was, where would she keep it? It seemed unlikely that she stored anything like that at home or in the car. Her office was the most plausible option. Of course, she probably carried them with her during her business trips. I started piecing together her routine. She transported work papers, her laptop, and presentation materials in a large briefcase that she typically kept in her office. If she had an early morning flight, though, she'd bring it home the night before and pack it into her suitcase for the trip. That small detail seemed crucial. If I wanted to search her briefcase, I'd need to find the right moment, preferably the evening before an early flight. Until then, I resolved to keep my composure and act like nothing was wrong. That afternoon, as the kids got home from school, I found myself too preoccupied with everyday tasks to dwell on my suspicions. But the thought of her infidelity still lingered, a nagging whisper in the back of my mind. When Emily came home from work, I was in the middle of cleaning up a small disaster in the kitchen. I'd spilled a dish of beans all over the floor while making dinner, and between tidying up and keeping the kids occupied, I must have looked like a frazzled mess. Thankfully, Emily didn't seem to notice anything out of the ordinary. Once the chaos settled and the kitchen was clean again, I greeted her with a quick kiss on the cheek, and we all sat down to dinner as usual. I tried to act normal, engaging in casual conversation. "So, you've got another trip coming up in a couple of days?" I asked, testing the waters. "Yeah," she replied with a lackluster tone. "Same old routine. Honestly, I'm not looking forward to it." Sensing an opportunity, I probed further. "If it's that dull, have you thought about applying for a different role? You've been at the company for years, and you've learned so much. I'm sure you could transition into something new." She shrugged and mentioned wanting to gain more experience before considering a desk job. I decided to appeal to her softer side. "You know, I really miss you when you're away," I said, hoping to tug at her emotions a bit. She sighed, her tone gentle. "I know. I miss you guys too. I'm sorry." I pressed on. "So, where are you headed this time? Will you be leaving in the morning? Maybe we can spend some time together before you go." I held her gaze, aware that the kids were listening. Despite my best efforts to act casual, my nerves were betraying me. My stomach churned, making it hard to eat. Emily didn't seem to notice, though. She was eating slowly, without much enthusiasm herself. "I'm just going to Denton," she said. "I'll be leaving tomorrow morning around 7:30. I need something to keep me going until Friday." She gave me a playful wink, catching me off guard. I smiled back, forcing myself to match her energy. "I'll be here when you get back," I replied in a similar tone. To my surprise, she blushed a little, which threw me even more. Her comment about bringing her briefcase home confirmed my suspicions. She wouldn't stop by the office before heading to the airport. It was the perfect chance for me to check her bag. The evening before her trip, Emily came home in unusually high spirits. She parked her car in the garage next to mine, as always, but there was an unmistakable excitement about her. I couldn't help but wonder if our earlier conversation had cheered her up or if there was another reason for her enthusiasm. Either way, I knew my chance was coming. I had to see what was in that briefcase. When Emily came into the house, I noticed she didn't bring her briefcase with her. It must still be in the car, I thought, filing that detail away for later. At the time, I was busy preparing dinner, so I didn't make much of it. We sat down at the table, and as we started eating, she casually said, "Oh, can you grab my suitcase from the garage after dinner? I left it in the car." "Of course," I replied with practiced ease, doing my best not to show even a hint of suspicion. She smiled and asked, "Are you all set for the week?" Her tone was light, as if she were trying to reassure me. "Oh, yeah," I said, playing along. "It's just a routine trip. My briefcase is in the car, ready to go. I'll pack an overnight bag later with the essentials." Trying to keep the conversation natural, I added, "Do you have any plans while you're away?" She shook her head and smiled. "Not really. The kids and I will stick to our usual routine. Maybe we can plan something fun as a family for the weekend when I get back." "That sounds perfect," I said, and for a brief moment I felt like we were a normal couple again. After dinner, she helped me clear the table and load the dishwasher, her demeanor as cheerful as ever. Once the kitchen was tidied up, she excused herself to the bedroom to start packing. That's when I headed to the garage to fetch her suitcase. When I opened the car door, I didn't see the briefcase in the back seat as I had expected. I checked the front passenger side, nothing. That left only the trunk. The realization brought a sense of relief. I already had a plan to get access to it later that night. I carried her suitcase upstairs to the bedroom and casually asked, "Hey, where are the car keys? I think one of my tires is losing air. I'll take it to Liam's station and have him check it out real quick." She paused for a moment, as if trying to process my sudden interest in car maintenance, before reaching into her purse to hand me the keys. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Why not just swap it out for the spare?" I shook my head firmly, keeping my tone matter-of-fact. "The spare's for emergencies, sure, but we've got the time to do it properly. It's better to fix it now than risk something worse later." She seemed to accept my reasoning and nodded. "Okay. Just don't take too long." Grateful for her cooperation, I quickly made my way back to the garage. I climbed into her car, started it up, and pulled out of the driveway, heading straight for Liam's gas station. When I arrived, I honked the horn a couple of times until Liam appeared from one of the service bays. Recognizing me, he waved and opened the garage door, gesturing for me to drive inside. Once he closed the door behind me, he leaned against the car with a curious expression. "What's up, buddy? Car trouble, or are you just looking for an excuse to get out of the house?" I hesitated for a moment, then gave him a half-smile. "Let's just say I'm multitasking," I replied cryptically. Liam raised an eyebrow, clearly sensing there was more to the story. "Trouble at home?" he asked, his tone light but concerned. "Maybe," I admitted reluctantly, popping the trunk open to retrieve Emily's briefcase. My hands felt heavy as I lifted it out and placed it on the workbench. The weight of it wasn't just physical, it felt like it carried the burden of all my suspicions. Liam, sensing I needed space, glanced toward the small shop where a customer was waiting. "Well, I've got someone to take care of." "Take your time, buddy," he said casually before heading off. Nodding, I turned back to the briefcase. My fingers fumbled with the lock as my thoughts raced, and with a click, it opened. I carefully began going through its contents, taking extra care not to disturb anything. My hands moved to the side pockets on the lid, more out of nervous habit than any real expectation, and that's when I found it. An open package. My chest tightened as I realized what it was, a partially used box of contraceptives. 3 pieces were missing. For a moment, the air felt too thick to breathe. My worst fears had been confirmed. I placed the package back exactly where I'd found it, ensuring everything looked untouched, and closed the briefcase. Sliding it back into the trunk, I locked it and leaned against the car, trying to steady myself. Liam reappeared as I shut the trunk, his expression a mix of curiosity and concern. "Did you find what you were looking for? What's going on?" I hesitated, then nodded grimly. "Yeah, I did," I said quietly, my voice tinged with sadness and disappointment. Liam studied me for a moment but didn't press. "Want me to check the tire pressure while you figure things out?" he offered. Grateful for his discretion, I nodded. "Thanks, man." I'll just hang out here for a bit. He gave me a knowing look, then got to work. While Liam busied himself, I drove out of the bay to a nearby pump and filled Emily's gas tank, an odd sense of finality settling over me. It wasn't out of kindness, it was habit, one I didn't know when I'd break. Driving back home, my thoughts spiraled. Anger mixed with frustration, each emotion hitting me like a wave. How could she do this? To me, to our marriage, to our kids? Every moment of doubt, every whispered excuse for her trips, now felt like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. But amid the swirling emotions, I forced myself to focus. The kids needed stability. If this marriage was heading toward its inevitable end, I'd need proof, something concrete to ensure custody. Emily might have betrayed me, but she was a good mother. For their sake, I couldn't take that from them. Visitation rights would be fair, but I'd fight for full custody. As I pulled into the garage and turned off the engine, I sat in silence for a moment, my hands gripping the wheel. I took a deep breath and stepped out, forcing the storm inside me to quiet. Back in the house, I called out, "Everything's set. Just a nail in the tire." My voice was as casual as I could make it. "Thanks," she replied from the bedroom, still not meeting my eyes. Needing a moment to steady myself, I grabbed a beer from the fridge and joined the kids in the family room. They were glued to a cartoon, their laughter cutting through the heaviness in my chest. I sipped my beer and tried to focus on their joy, even as my mind raced ahead, planning my next steps. About half an hour later, Emily came into the room and sat beside me on the couch. I stiffened slightly but tried not to let it show. To my surprise, she scooted closer and leaned into me. Her warmth pressed against my side, a familiar feeling that now felt foreign. She leaned in, her breath brushing my ear as she whispered, "Are you ready for tonight?" Her tone was soft, almost playful, but it only made the ache in my chest deepen. I turned to her, forcing a small smile, but inside, I felt the walls of our life together crumbling. After taking a sip of beer, I said, "I think so, but I've got a stomachache." Emily looked at me with concern, her voice soft. "Oh, that's too bad, honey." She leaned closer, wrapping an arm around me. "I love you," she whispered, her words tender yet bittersweet. Instinctively, I put my arm around her shoulders. My emotions were a tangled mess. Part of me still felt affection for her, but the shadow of betrayal loomed large. As she rested against me, I couldn't help but wonder why she'd done it. Was she searching for excitement? Something I couldn't give her? Maybe I'd never fully understand. What I did know was that my trust in her had been shattered. Later, we tucked the kids into bed together. As Emily kissed their foreheads, I watched her, a mix of love and sadness swelling in my chest. By morning, she would be gone again, as she so often was. The kids, already used to her trips, barely showed any unease. That night, we made love, but it felt different, hollow, missing the passion we once shared. Emily must have sensed it too. As I lay beside her, staring at the ceiling, she asked, "Is your stomach still bothering you, dear?" I nodded, forcing a faint smile. "Yeah, but I'll manage." In truth, my unease ran much deeper than any stomachache. Desperate for a glimmer of hope, I turned to her. "Do you really have to go on this trip?" My voice was low, almost pleading, as I wished with everything in me that she'd choose us, our family, over her plans. She sighed, her tone apologetic. "I'm sorry, honey, but this trip is important. I promise I'll try to finish things quickly and come home as soon as I can. I'm really looking forward to the weekend with all of you." Her words stung, but I simply nodded. "Okay," I said quietly. "You'd better get some sleep. You've got an early flight." Emily sat up, stretching. "I'll take a quick shower now so I don't have to rush in the morning." I nodded again, watching as she gathered her things and disappeared into the bathroom. The sound of the water running stirred something in me, a quiet, impulsive urge. Rising from bed, I made my way to her suitcase. It was partly open, sitting on the dresser. Carefully, I began to sift through its contents. On top were the usual business clothes, blouses, slacks, and a blazer. But as I dug deeper, my breath caught. Beneath the professional layers were pieces that felt entirely out of place, her most seductive lingerie, neatly folded, and a sleek black cocktail dress. The dress was one she wore only on special occasions, the kind that made her look irresistible. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the suitcase. My heart was heavy with suspicion, yet I didn't want to violate her privacy further. Taking a deep breath, I returned everything exactly as I'd found it, closed the suitcase, and climbed back into bed. But sleep didn't come. My mind raced, replaying the events of the last few days and imagining scenarios I didn't want to confront. At some point, I must have drifted off because the next thing I knew, I heard Emily stirring. The clock read just past 5. I stayed in bed, feigning sleep, not ready to face her or my emotions. She leaned over and kissed my cheek softly. "Still not feeling well, honey?" she asked. I nodded, my throat tight, unable to speak. "Okay. I'll call you when I land," she said gently. I listened to the faint sounds of her gathering her things, followed by the hum of the garage door. And then silence. Once I was sure she was gone, I got up and headed for the shower. The hot water did little to wash away the heaviness pressing down on me. I knew the day ahead wouldn't be easy, but I'd have to face it, one step at a time. After seeing the kids off to school and grabbing a quick breakfast, I sat down at the kitchen table with a heavy heart. My next steps were clear, but that didn't make them any easier. I reached for the phone book, flipping through the yellow pages in search of private detective services. My main goal was to find an agency with a nationwide presence, ideally with a branch in the city where Emily was heading. I made several calls, my voice steady despite the turmoil I felt inside. After a few inquiries, I found a reputable agency that fit my criteria and scheduled a meeting with their representative for later that morning. With that taken care of, I turned my attention to the next item on my list, finding a divorce attorney. A friend had mentioned a lawyer he trusted during his own divorce, so I dug out the name and contact information he had given me. A quick phone call later, I had an appointment set for the afternoon. Arriving at the private investigator's office, I was greeted by a no-nonsense professional who immediately put me at ease. I laid out my concerns, providing as many details as I could, Emily's name, her travel itinerary, and a recent photo to help with identification. I requested that they follow her activities during the evening while she was away, explaining that I needed evidence to confirm my suspicions. The investigator listened carefully, then assured me that they would monitor her movements discreetly and provide a report on Monday morning. While they couldn't guarantee incriminating photos, they promised to try their best to gather visual evidence. To ensure seamless communication, they agreed to send updates to their Denton branch, which I could access if needed. I made a substantial upfront payment, sealing our agreement before leaving the office. By the time I reached the lawyer's office that afternoon, I felt both drained and resolute. The attorney, a seasoned professional with a calm demeanor, welcomed me into his spacious office. After hearing my story, he explained how divorce worked in our state. "We're a no-fault state," he said, leaning back in his chair. "This means you don't have to prove wrongdoing to file for divorce. The court focuses on equitable distribution and what's in the best interest of the children." He went on to explain that, as the primary caregiver, I would likely be granted custody of the kids. However, Emily would have substantial visitation rights, which was something I had already anticipated. When it came to property, he explained that it would be split 50-50ths, regardless of circumstances. As for alimony, he added, it won't apply here. You and Emily have comparable incomes, and the court won't see a need for it. However, with you taking custody of the kids, she'll be required to pay child support. I nodded, absorbing the information. What about her inheritance? I asked, though I already knew my stance. That's hers to keep, he replied. Inherited assets aren't subject to division unless they were commingled with marital funds. That's fine, I said firmly. I don't want it. She'll need it to rebuild her life. My main concern, I emphasized, was ensuring the kids were safe and stable. I instructed the lawyer to prepare the divorce papers, citing irreconcilable differences. Additionally, I asked that Emily agree to vacate our house once the divorce was finalized. I'll have the documents ready by Monday, the lawyer assured me. You can decide how you'd like them delivered, through me or directly to her. I left his office with a mix of relief and sadness. Taking these steps felt like the right thing to do, but they also marked the end of a chapter I'd once cherished. The lawyer confirmed that, as the children's primary guardian, I had the legal authority to request Emily's immediate vacating of the house. It was agreed that once the kids turned 18, we would sell the property and divide the proceeds. Leaving the lawyer's office, a sense of relief washed over me. I now had a clear path forward for me and the kids, while Emily would eventually have to face the consequences of her actions. However, I didn't rush to address all of our financial matters, insurance, or any other legal intricacies just yet. I felt I had ample time to figure it all out after serving her the divorce papers. Given her inheritance, I wasn't overly concerned about her share of our joint savings. She had more than enough to manage on her own. When school ended, I returned home to prepare for the rest of the evening. On Friday afternoon, Emily came back from work, and I offered to handle her laundry, as I always did, but she politely declined. "I'll get to it later," she said with a smile. I couldn't help but grin at the subtle yet clear message she was sending. I understood perfectly. Keeping her extramarital affairs hidden was a priority, and managing the laundry herself ensured no suspicious items would surface. Later that night, as we lay in bed, Emily voiced concern over my ongoing stomach problems. "You've been dealing with this for too long," she said with genuine worry in her voice. I played it off, offering a casual response. "I'm planning to try a new medication a friend recommended. Hopefully, this will do the trick and bring things back to normal." I could sense her relief in her next words. "I miss you," she whispered, pulling me closer. Despite the weight of my suspicions and the fact that her betrayal was now confirmed, I couldn't completely shut off the emotions I once had for her. The following Monday morning, after sending the kids off to school and Emily off to work, I received a call from the detective agency. The report was ready. I told them I'd be there shortly, and within 30 minutes, I was seated in front of the office manager, who was eager to share what they had uncovered. He handed me the report, and explained that a fax had just arrived from the Denton office that morning. "I didn't have time to go through everything, but I gave it a quick glance," he said, "and the photos and details seem pretty damning." I opened the report, my heart pounding as I scanned the first few pages. The subject of the report was identified as Emily Barton, and the surveillance began on Wednesday, June 16th, at 5:17 p.m. in the lobby of the Denton Marriott Hotel. The agent had confirmed her identity by matching a recent photo of Emily. The detective also noted that Emily was wearing a company badge, which further verified that she was indeed at the hotel for a work-related event, though the circumstances surrounding the meeting were far from professional. I continued reading, each line feeding my growing sense of betrayal. The photos attached to the report seemed to paint a clear picture. Emily wasn't just attending a business event, she was meeting someone. The timing, location, and nature of the meeting were all adding up to something far worse than I had anticipated. I could feel my anger and frustration rising as I processed the report. It was one thing to have my suspicions, but now I had hard evidence. The truth was undeniable. The lawyer confirmed that, as the children's primary guardian, I had the legal authority to request Emily's immediate vacating of the house. It was agreed that once the kids turned 18, we would sell the property and divide the proceeds. Leaving the lawyer's office, a sense of relief washed over me. I now had a clear path forward for me and the kids, while Emily would eventually have to face the consequences of her actions. However, I didn't rush to address all of our financial matters, insurance, or any other legal intricacies just yet. I felt I had ample time to figure it all out after serving her the divorce papers. Given her inheritance, I wasn't overly concerned about her share of our joint savings. She had more than enough to manage on her own. When school ended, I returned home to prepare for the rest of the evening. On Friday afternoon, Emily came back from work, and I offered to handle her laundry, as I always did, but she politely declined. "I'll get to it later," she said with a smile. I couldn't help but grin at the subtle yet clear message she was sending. I understood perfectly. Keeping her extramarital affairs hidden was a priority, and managing the laundry herself ensured no suspicious items would surface. Later that night, as we lay in bed, Emily voiced concern over my ongoing stomach problems. "You've been dealing with this for too long," she said with genuine worry in her voice. I played it off, offering a casual response. "I'm planning to try a new medication a friend recommended. Hopefully, this will do the trick and bring things back to normal." I could sense her relief in her next words. "I miss you," she whispered, pulling me closer. Despite the weight of my suspicions and the fact that her betrayal was now confirmed, I couldn't completely shut off the emotions I once had for her. The following Monday morning, after sending the kids off to school and Emily off to work, I received a call from the detective agency. The report was ready. I told them I'd be there shortly, and within 30 minutes, I was seated in front of the office manager, who was eager to share what they had uncovered. He handed me the report, and explained that a fax had just arrived from the Denton office that morning. "I didn't have time to go through everything, but I gave it a quick glance," he said, "and the photos and details seem pretty damning." I opened the report, my heart pounding as I scanned the first few pages. The subject of the report was identified as Emily Barton, and the surveillance began on Wednesday, June 16th, at 5:17 p.m. in the lobby of the Denton Marriott Hotel. The agent had confirmed her identity by matching a recent photo of Emily. The detective also noted that Emily was wearing a company badge, which further verified that she was indeed at the hotel for a work-related event, though the circumstances surrounding the meeting were far from professional. I continued reading, each line feeding my growing sense of betrayal. The photos attached to the report seemed to paint a clear picture. Emily wasn't just attending a business event, she was meeting someone. The timing, location, and nature of the meeting were all adding up to something far worse than I had anticipated. I could feel my anger and frustration rising as I processed the report. It was one thing to have my suspicions, but now I had hard evidence. The truth was undeniable. The report meticulously outlined Emily's movements, providing a detailed timeline of the evening's events. At 5:23 p.m., Emily arrived at room 414, accompanied by a staff member who confirmed her check-in. She was carrying a briefcase, and the report emphasized that she was alone at the time. A photograph, labeled Exhibit 1A, showed Emily dressed professionally before entering the room, with the subtle detail of her wedding ring still on her fingers. It was clear the photo had been taken discreetly, likely with a mobile phone. The surveillance team had rented a room across from Emily's, ensuring they could observe her without drawing attention. At 6:31 p.m., they noted that Emily left her room and headed toward the elevator. Just a minute later, at 6:32 p.m., she exited the elevator and entered the hotel lobby. According to the report, she was now dressed in a small black cocktail dress, paired with high heels. The dress was something she often wore when trying to impress, and she was also wearing the necklace I had given her for our 10th anniversary. However, there was a glaring absence. Her wedding rings were missing. This detail was captured clearly in Exhibit 1B, a photograph that left no room for doubt. She had taken them off. What followed was even more damning. The report included a photo, Exhibit 1D, showing Emily locked in a tight embrace with a man, sharing a passionate kiss while seated in a booth at a restaurant. The intensity of their connection was unmistakable, and the image spoke volumes. They remained together until 8:51 p.m., when they both left the restaurant. According to the report, they then took the elevator back to Emily's floor. A second photograph, Exhibit 1E, showed the couple entering Emily's room, room 414. At 9:03 p.m. Emily appeared slightly intoxicated but undeniably satisfied with the events of the evening. Later that night, at 11:13 p.m., the man left Emily's room and exited the building. The investigators had noted the license plate number of the car he drove, a vehicle registered to one Alexander B. Tate, residing at 1424 Azalea Drive in Denton. The report also mentioned that Tate was married, with 2 young children. The implications were obvious. As I sifted through the report, I felt a growing sense of disgust and betrayal. The more I read, the more the depth of Emily's actions became clear. And to my horror, the following night she had repeated the same behavior, meeting another man. This new information seemed to confirm what I had feared. The affair wasn't a one-time mistake, but a calculated pattern. The report, now securely in my possession, weighed heavily in my mind as I drove back from the detective agency. The anger and betrayal that had been building up in me over the last few days surged to the surface, leaving me with a deep sense of confusion and heartbreak. My wife, the woman I had trusted and built a life with, had been living a double life. The fact that she had removed her wedding rings, yet continued on with another man, made everything feel so much worse. She had no respect for what we had, no regard for the family we built. Back at home, I felt a strange sense of finality. The report was damning, and it fueled my decision to move forward with the divorce. I immediately called my lawyer to confirm the filing status. When he told me the papers were ready, a small part of me almost felt relief. It was time to start moving on. I knew the process wouldn't be easy, but it was the only path left to me. I asked my lawyer to file the papers that very day and to serve them publicly at Emily's workplace, wanting to make sure the consequences of her actions were painfully clear. That night, Emily's presence felt more like a distant memory than a reality. I could feel the tension between us, even though she didn't say anything outright. She noticed I was distant, and though she attempted to show concern for my health, I could tell she was growing wary. She must have felt something was off, but I wasn't ready to expose the truth yet. I chose to stay silent, leaving her to wonder. The next morning, I woke up with a heavy heart and barely slept, haunted by everything that had unfolded. As the children stirred, I put on a brave face and prepared breakfast. Emily, ever the picture of composure, acted as if nothing was wrong. When it was time for her to leave, she gave me a hug and a kiss, but there was a certain hesitation in her embrace, something I couldn't quite place. I responded with a half-hearted hug, encouraging her to go. As the door closed behind her, I caught a glimpse of her face. There was a brief flash of something in her eyes, something like realization. She whispered, "I love you," but I wasn't sure if she truly believed it or if she was saying it out of guilt. My emotions were a tangled mess, but as the tears threatened to spill, I pushed them back. She had made her choices, and now it was time for me to make mine. As I stood in the silence of the empty house, I felt the weight of the decisions that lay ahead. This was just the beginning. After Emily left that morning, I felt a wave of sadness crash over me. I wanted to cry, to let everything out, but I couldn't. The children needed me, and I had to keep it together for them. I focused on getting them ready for the school bus, trying to mask the storm inside me. When the phone rang around 10:45 a.m., I hesitated before answering. The caller ID displayed Emily's workplace. I answered the call, not saying a word. A brief pause followed, and then I heard her voice, trembling and soft. "I'm sorry," she whispered before the line went silent. I didn't respond. I wasn't sure what to say or if there was anything left to say. Emily didn't come home that night, and I couldn't help but wonder if she was continuing her deceitful behavior, living her life without a care for what she had torn apart. I felt justified in my anger, but at the same time, a small part of me wondered if I was being too harsh. The children noticed her absence and were visibly upset. I tried to keep their spirits up, taking them to McDonald's for dinner. It wasn't much, but it distracted them, and by the time we got home, they were exhausted and went straight to bed. The next morning, Emily called. Her voice sounded hesitant. "Honey, can I come home and pack my things? Can we talk?" Guilt rose up in me at her words, but I quickly suppressed it. The past was done. I didn't owe her anything anymore. I responded calmly. "Why don't you come between 9 and noon? The kids and I won't be here. As for the conversation, I'll only speak with you once you've signed, notarized, and returned the divorce papers. Then I'll listen to whatever you have to say." There was a sob on the other end of the line. She whispered, "Good." The line went silent again, and I hung up, feeling a strange sense of relief. 6 months later, the divorce was finalized. Emily, in the meantime, had become pregnant during the affair, though she tried to hide it from the man she had been seeing. Her contraceptive methods had failed, and now she had to face the consequences of her choices. Even without the evidence I'd found, it felt like the truth would have surfaced eventually. There were rumors that she had started dating again, and part of me wondered if I should warn her future partner about her past. But then again, it wasn't my responsibility to clean up her mess. Our final meeting took place in my lawyer's office. When she arrived, she pleaded with me to reconsider the divorce, explaining how hard it was for her to lose access to our children. But I couldn't look past the betrayal, the lies. Trust had been shattered beyond repair. I told her flatly that I couldn't trust her anymore. No matter how much she regretted her actions now, the damage had been done. The family we once had was gone, and nothing could bring it back. Emily's admission about her psychological condition didn't change anything for me. She told me she'd seen a psychologist and been diagnosed with nymphomania, insisting that she now had her impulses under control. But I couldn't accept that as a valid excuse. Even if she claimed her urges were managed, the fact that she hadn't addressed them earlier only reinforced that she hadn't put in any real effort to fix the situation. If she had taken responsibility for her actions sooner, we might not be in this mess. When I left the lawyer's office, Emily was still crying. I felt a bitter satisfaction in knowing that she was facing the consequences of her choices, but it didn't make things easier. I had recently reconnected with an old school friend, who worked at a nightclub, and he informed me that he had seen Emily at the club several times. She went there on weekends, acting provocatively and surrounded by different men. The image of her behaving like that, knowing the mother of my children was so irresponsible, devastated me. It was clear she hadn't changed. If anything, her behavior had only escalated. Then, one of Emily's friends reached out to me, telling me that Emily was in poor health. Apparently, she had contracted herpes and needed my help. While I did feel a hint of sympathy, I made it clear that I wouldn't be offering any assistance. Emily had chosen this path, and now she had to live with the consequences, both emotionally and physically. As for me, I started dating again. I met a woman who was around my age, divorced herself after discovering her ex-husband's infidelity, and had a similar outlook on life. She had strength and resilience, qualities I respected. We connected on a deep level, and it seemed like my children liked her too, which only made the relationship feel more natural. I knew that it was only a matter of time before I considered taking the next step with her, but for now, I was content to let things unfold naturally. The healing had begun, and I could finally see a future beyond the wreckage of my marriage.